Hey everyone, it's Jess. I feel so much better when I film outside. I really like it. It's just, sometimes it can be a bit tricky because there's obviously a lot of noises I can't control. When I can film outside, guys, it's one of the best experiences, and hopefully it is for you as well, because I know you kind of like the sound of the water trickling. Today's video is going to be a how to care video on the Begonia Maculata Wightii, which is this lovely specimen here. I've got him staked up at the moment, so it's a little bit hard for me to pick him up and show you, but this is my Begonia Maculata Wightii, and it was also the video that I had wanted to get up yesterday, but as you guys probably saw from my video yesterday, I wasn't having the best day. But thank you guys so much for those lovely comments and messages. I know I'm a few days behind in replying to everyone, but you guys, like, if there's one thing that keeps me going, it's really you guys, and being able to make these videos for you and just being able to share love of plants together. But guys, today's video is of course on how to care for the Begonia Maculata Wightii. This is a begonia that started, I think, at least in Australia, became super popular at least 2 years ago. 2 years ago, I think it was actually quite hard to get hold of one of these, and in fact it was probably quite expensive. I think from memory it was around 60 bucks for a small juvenile plant, but now they're considerably cheaper. I think you can get one for about $30 or so for a smaller plant. This plant that I have here is a year old now, and he's a pretty cool dude. I obviously love this plant because it's so unusual. It's got lovely polka dots and this beautiful red underside. I love this plant. It's beautiful. It was one of the first house plants that I actually got. Some facts for everyone. Hopefully it's not too boring, but I think these are quite interesting. A bit of trivia, but this begonia was actually discovered in 1982 in Brazil, and this plant is said to be native to the Central to South America region, such as Colombia and Brazil. Sorry guys, somebody's just decided to use their leaf blower. Hopefully that's not too distracting. And is also native to those subtropical regions, and so therefore prefers a more warmer and high humidity environment. However guys, when I get into tips around care, a good thing to know is if you aren't able to give your plant a lot of humidity, or the high humidity to replicate its natural habitat, I wouldn't be too worried about it, because I grow my begonia outdoors and where there's very little humidity, and I haven't had too much trouble with him. It is a species of cane begonia, and cane begonia are characterized by quite leggy and cane-like stems. It can get quite tall, and these leaves that look like angel wings. It is a begonia with a waxy leaf. It's different to other begonias where they're a little bit more hairy and their leaves are a little bit more delicate to touch, whereas this Begonia Wightii, the leaves are a little bit more waxy, and that's actually a good thing when it comes to their care, because this begonia I find is a little bit more easier to care for than my other begonias, such as my Begonia exotica. Another interesting fact guys is apparently what I came across was these amazing red undersides apparently inspired Christian Louboutin's letters with the red undersides. Now whether or not that is true, leave it up to you, but I thought that was quite nice to have, you know, a plant that was just so inspiring. This plant is also toxic, so if you do have pets, I would just be mindful not to let your pet munch on this begonia. It can get up to heights of 1.5 meters tall, and its leaf can get up to lengths of about 20 centimeters long. And I think I've got one of these leaves right here that probably is about 20 centimeters. So getting into the care tips, from a lighting perspective, like a lot of other begonias, you want to give this guy some bright indirect light. Keep my plant outside. It gets about 2 hours of bright morning light, and for the rest of the day it gets some shade. You don't want to keep your plant in bright afternoon sun because that will burn its leaves. If you're wanting to keep your plant indoors, if you are in a situation where you have a spot that is a lot more direct light versus a spot that is a little bit more shadier, I'd actually recommend keeping him in the shadier location rather than one that has direct sunlight, because you don't want his leaves to burn. And you also want to maintain the darker green color, because one thing I found with this plant is the more light you give it can lose some of that vibrancy in its leaves. The only other thing to keep in mind with lighting is if it doesn't get enough light, this plant will get leggy because it's really wanting to reach for that light. As I'm really sorry about this leaf blower, but the sun's going down and I need to film. From a temperature perspective, optimal temperatures are between 18 to 26 degrees. I keep my plant outdoors, and I keep it outdoors for most of the year, including over winter, where it gets to lows at night of about 6 degrees, and it hasn't given me a lot of trouble. The only thing I'll say is if you have a juvenile plant, by all means keep it indoors. Only when it gets to quite an established plant will I recommend you keeping it outdoors. And actually, when I got this plant when it was a lot smaller, I kept it indoors until it got a lot bigger. This plant is not frost tolerant, so if you are living in the northern hemispheres, I'd recommend bringing in your plant over winter because it will die in the frost. In terms of humidity for this plant, as this plant is native to a subtropical region, it would prefer more humid environments. However, as I mentioned previously, I wouldn't be too worried if you can't give your plant that much humidity, because it can still survive. If you are able to give your plant humidity, I would recommend humidity levels of between 60 to 70%. You don't want it to be too humid, otherwise it can cause rot on its leaves and mildew. The trick with humidity is also to keep it in a place that's quite aerated, where you're going to get fresh air, because that also prevents rot and bacteria from growing. In terms of soil for this plant, I'd recommend a well-draining soil. I keep him in a mix of orchid bark, perlite and potting mix. The pot I also keep him in is actually quite well draining. That helps in preventing root rot. The other thing with soil is I put a bit of charcoal in the soil, because that also helps with preventing bacterial and fungal from growing, and also is a good preventative measure for any root rot. In terms of potting for this plant actually prefers to be a little bit more root bound. So the pot I would recommend for it is not to be too big, because that would actually retain a lot more moisture, and that actually might encourage a lot more root rot. From a watering perspective, I read that this begonia prefers its soil to be a little bit more moist. Now, I don't disagree with that. However, it is a begonia and it is quite susceptible to rot, as with a lot of begonias out there. So my recommendation is actually don't overwater your plant in the hopes of keeping that soil moist. So really only water your plant when you see that the soil is dry, and you want to water by deep watering, and that is pouring water in until it really saturates and drains from the bottom of the pot. I wouldn't recommend watering your plant every couple of days just for the sake of keeping the soil moist, because that's actually going to encourage rot on your plant. So I'll let the soil dry completely out before I deep water my plant. The growing months, you want to water it a little bit more, and indeed during spring and summer I water my plants probably 3 to 4 days, because it can get quite hot. Just looking at the soil to see when it dried out. Now it's getting into winter, I will water it every 7 to 10 days. When you're watering your begonia, I recommend watering close to the stem. And that is because you don't want to wet the soil too much, particularly if you have a bigger pot, because that makes it harder for the water to actually evaporate and make your plant a little bit more susceptible to root rot. So just with watering, I'd recommend you just water it with a watering can with a spout, so you can really target getting it as close to the stem as possible. I have seen that you don't want to get the leaves leaves and the rest of the plant too wet, you water it because it can encourage rot on the leaves. However, I would say that if you get the leaves a little bit too wet, that shouldn't be too much of a concern, provided that you give enough time for the water to evaporate. It's been raining in Sydney for the past consecutive days, and I actually want to show you what happens when the leaves get wet and don't really get an opportunity to dry out, because you do get some mold and fungal growth on your plants. In terms of fertilizing for this plant, I only really fertilize this plant during the growing season, and I give it a diluted liquid-based fertilizer. I will give it every week or so, and just to help it grow. And also with fertilizing, it actually helps this begonia flower, which is quite nice. And the flowers are a lovely white, dainty, quite a dainty flower. With flowering, what you want to do is, after it's flowered, you want to remove the dead flowers, because that will actually encourage your plant to flower in the next season. I don't fertilize this plant in the dormant months because I want to give this plant a rest. This plant also doesn't necessarily go into dormancy, so to say, so it doesn't die back, but in terms of growing, it will definitely slow its growing patterns. To help your plant grow, I'd recommend staking him up, because as a cane begonia, these begonias can become quite leggy, so you do want to support him with some stakes. I've got some bamboo stake here, which I kind of prop him up. You also want to do that because his leaves can be actually quite big, and one way to maintain the health of your plant is not to let the leaves touch the soil, because then it can get quite soggy, or touch the ground, because that actually, I find, encourages the rot on the leaves. As like most begonias are a little bit more sensitive and a little bit more delicate. As a begonia, from a maintenance perspective, you do need to pay a little bit more attention to it, although having said that, it requires less care than other begonias. But every week or so, I'll just keep an eye out for him. If I do see his leaves browning or wrinkling, and if that's because it's been touching the ground, it's been touching some moist areas, and it hasn't had the chance to dry out, it will start to brown and it will start to rot. I trimmed my plant because I wanted to show you guys what that looked like. Once you've noticed that, I would actually suggest then trim those parts of the leaves off. Maintenance and pruning your plant is also very important for the overall health of your plant. So once you notice some leaves have been compromised, such as these ones, this has got a bit of mold on it, you want to trim it right away, because you don't want it to threaten the integrity of the rest of your plant. And that is true for a lot of begonias. Once you notice that something is not right, make sure to treat it right away. So the biggest pests for this plant is rot, bacterial and fungal growth. It will happen on its leaves or in the roots. I might talk about the ones on the leaves first. So what I have here, guys, if you can see these little spores that are forming on this leaf, this is an example of when your begonia is actually had a lot of water on its leaves and it hasn't been given the time for it to dry out. And I was mentioning the past couple of days in Sydney it's been raining a lot. Now this is what happens when you keep your begonia in an area where it's quite high humidity. That's why I mentioned that aeration is quite important, because you don't want these spores to form. And in fact, I keep my plant outside on the veranda. It's not in an enclosed location, and yet what I will do after this video is I'm going to trim this leaf off, because I don't want the bacteria and the pests and the fungal growth to affect the rest of the plant. In order to treat it, what I did was I mixed a bit of neem oil, a few drops of hand wash and some water in a standard size spray. And what I did earlier today was I really sprayed the leaves of this plant, both on the top side and the underside. Don't forget the underside, guys, when you're treating for pests, because your pests are very smart and they can hide in the crevices. So I will be doing that for the next couple of days or so until I see that the spores have disappeared. In terms of rot for its roots, a good sign for that is if you do notice your plant's leaves start to yellow and stopping watering actually hasn't solved the problem, I will actually take the plant out of the pot and just check for root rot. And what root rot looks like is that the roots become super mushy and stringy. That is a sign that's root rot, and how you're supposed to treat that is by potting your plant in some new potting mix. Now, to actually increase the charcoal I put into that well draining potting mix. Compared to other begonias, I find that when other begonias get attacked by pests, their health declines a lot quicker. Whereas for this guy, it's a lot more easier to take care of and a lot more tolerant compared to other begonias out there. In terms of propagation for this plant can be propagated by stem cutting. What you want to do is you want to take a section of the plant with the stem and a leaf on it, and you want to pop it in some water. Soil, it takes about 5 to 7 weeks for the roots to form. Guys, I hope you enjoyed this video on how to care for your Begonia Maculata Wightii. It is a very, very beautiful plant, and it's very rewarding to take care of. I'm so excited for when summer comes around, because I think this guy is going to grow a lot more. But guys, if you have any questions on care tips for this plant, please let me know either in the comments below or drop me a DM on my Instagram at JessiePotPlants. Otherwise guys, thank you so much for watching. I feel a lot better today. Thank you so much guys, and I will see you tomorrow. Bye!